When Alex Bloomberg and Matthew Lieber founded Gimlet Media in 2014, they didn't just create a podcast company. They ignited a revolution. At a time when podcasts were largely seen as a niche medium, Gimlet brought a level of storytelling, production quality, and heart that transformed the entire industry. Shows like Startup, Reply All, and Science Versus did more than entertain. They captivated audiences with stories that were intimate, real, and innovative.
From Gimlet, this is Reply All. I'm PJ Vogt.
And I'm Alex Goldman.
So a couple years ago, a friend was visiting from out of town, and she took me to see this play. It was called Perfect Crime. All she really knew about it was that it was a crime thriller. So we went to this off-Broadway theater where the stage was set up like an office in an old detective story. Big wood bookshelves, an old Persian rug. We sit down and the play begins. This is a recording of the first scene. A man is sitting in the office listening to a reel-to-reel recorder, and then this woman barges onto the stage. She's wearing a wig, but you can't tell if you're supposed to know that it's a wig or not, and you don't really have that much time to wonder because she immediately pulls out a gun and shoots the guy. And so begins the most bewildering couple hours of theater I've ever seen in my life. The play has the rhythms of a detective story. People are finding stuff out, and clues are revealed, and accusations are made. But sitting there watching it, I could not follow anything. Which meant that I didn't know if the play was over my head or really just bad.
So PJ made me go see this play. He actually made me go see it with our producer, Fia Benin. And it is pretty much as bizarre as he describes it. I kept leaning over to her and going like, do you understand what's going on? And she would lean back and say, no. And so I looked on Yelp, and the internet feels the same way as I do about this play. Here are a couple of reviews that I read on Yelp. First, the pros. The seats have ample legroom, and the sets aren't bad for a one-set play. That's everything that's good about this show. And then here's another one. At the end of the play, the audience was so stunned that we didn't know we were supposed to clap until one of the actors took a bow. The applause was then muted out of pity and mixed with laughter as we realized that this awful experience was over.
So I should say, I think Yelp reviews are maybe my least favorite part of the internet. They tend to be written in this voice that's like mean and picky and just finds fault in everything. But even though I don't like Yelp reviews, or online reviews at all for that matter, I know that they're very powerful. Bad Yelp reviews can destroy somebody's business. And so it is crazy to me that anything could be so hated online and still survive. Particularly something that relies on new people going to see it again and again and again. But my first clue that perfect crime might exist somehow magically outside of the laws of the universe as I have understood it up to this point came when I met the star of the play, Catherine Russell.
Hi.
I've never met anyone like her.
Nice to meet you.
This is how she reacted when I asked her about the bad reviews that I had found on the internet.
I'm pretty optimistic, and I'm happy when I get up in the morning. So I can't really make a judgment about other people's lives. If they want to judge me, there's nothing I can do about it.
I guess I hadn't understood, the Yelp page, it had like a lower star rating than the Yelp page for Rikers Island. It was like Rikers had 2.5, and I think you guys had 1.5.
I mean, it is what it is. We're still here. People are buying tickets.
And this is what is actually crazy about Perfect Crime. Perfect Crime has been running nonstop for 28 years. It's the longest running play in New York City. And Catherine Russell, who stars as sharp-tongued psychiatrist Margaret Thorne Brent, holds the Guinness World Record for doing the same performance more times than anybody else in history.
What did Mrs. Johansson tell you?
Put the gun down, Mrs. Brent.
Doctor, can't you fucking say doctor?
Okay, put the gun
You said
down.
Mrs. Johansson.
April 18th, 1987. It was our first performance.
And what, as someone who was 2 years old in 1987, what was happening in 1987?
How lovely of you to point that out. At least you were alive. Usually people are not alive. There were no cell phones, really. People didn't have cell phones. No DNA testing, really. There's certainly no DVDs yet. It was a different time.
So what is going on here? How does Perfect Crime survive?
Is this PJ?
Yeah, is this Lonnie?
Yes, it is. Hi, how are you?
This is Lonnie Price. He's a longtime Broadway guy. He's been a writer, an actor, a director. He knows theater. And Lonnie said the fact that Perfect Crime stays up is especially surprising because theater is even more expensive than most people realize. Like, even shows that critics love, that audiences seem to love, close all the time.
Most shows fail. Most. It must be 90% or something. Most fail. Failure is in your inches from failure at all times. It's the odd thing that's a hit.
This play's not a hit. Reply All saw it on 3 different nights, once during the weekend, and we never saw the theater more than a quarter full. So how does it make enough money to run? Lonnie did the math.
So if it's 4 characters, 1 set, so that means it doesn't have a lot of stagehands that it employs. I don't know if the actors are making $600 a week, maybe $800 a week, maybe less. So saying maybe their entire budget for salaries is $7,000 a week. So depending on the deal they have with the theater, and if they have a lease on the theater, they don't have to sell very many tickets. One would think, looking at it, it's probably the cheapest show in New York to run, one would think.
Lonnie said this could work, but they'd have to be scrappy. Catherine, it turns out, is scrappy as hell.
A guy came in, he didn't like Perfect Crime, I think, and he complained about it, and he tried to take money from the guys who were selling the concessions. But he was like really belligerent and getting in his face and trying to literally say, I want my money back, and trying to grab the money. He was a total asshole. And I got right in his face and I said, what's the problem here, buddy? You saw the play, you don't get your money back. Get out of here.
But Gimlet was more than just a content producer. It was a symbol of the creative possibilities the podcast medium had to offer. By focusing on narrative-driven shows, Gimlet elevated the podcast from a hobbyist side project to a serious art form that commanded attention from both media companies and investors. They helped turn a passive, often overlooked medium into a cultural powerhouse. The company's meteoric success caught the attention of Spotify, which acquired Gimlet in 2019 for a staggering $230 million. The move was part of Spotify's grand plan to dominate the audio world, including its podcast investments in platforms like Anchor and Parcast. But the acquisition marked the beginning of Gimlet's transformation from a beacon of creativity to just another cog in the corporate machine. Internal conflicts, creative struggles, and controversy soon followed, and by 2023, Gimlet was no longer an independent entity. It had been merged into Parcast, effectively erasing the Gimlet name and its once bold mission. Gimlet wasn't just 1 or 2 shows. It was a platform for a diverse array of podcasts, each pushing the boundaries of what audio storytelling could achieve. Startup, which lasted from 2014 to 2019, Gimlet's first podcast and its defining moment. It was created by Alex Blumberg. This documentary-style show offered an unprecedented look behind the curtain of starting a company. But Startup wasn't just about any company. It was the story of Gimlet Media itself. Blumberg shared his own journey filled with all the raw honesty, failures, and triumphs that come with entrepreneurship, from awkward investor meetings to sleepless nights spent trying to build something meaningful. Startup set the tone for Gimlet's intimate, narrative-first approach to podcasting.
I'm Alex Blumberg, and for a long time I was a producer at the public radio show This American Life, and also the co-creator of a podcast called Planet Money, where for years I reported on business and the economy. It was a great gig until I decided to do something rash. I decided to take what I learned from reporting on other people's businesses and start my own business.
Are you meeting someone with money?
This is my wife, Nazanin, early one morning a couple months ago, stopping me as I was on my way out the door to do something I'd never done before. Meet a guy who works at a venture capital firm and try to get him to give me money. To invest in my business. A podcast business. I love podcasts. I love making them. I love listening to them. But there's all kinds of podcasts out there, from a couple people talking around a mic to the kind that I make and that I have a particular soft spot for, which focus on storytelling and journalism. Those podcasts, they take way more money and resources and time than the other ones. And probably because of this, there aren't that many of them. To me, it seems like there aren't enough of them. It seemed like someone should come up with money to invest in making new shows like these and come up with a theory about how those shows could be profitable. I kept waiting for someone to do that. And then came this thought, a thought that's gotten a lot of people into a lot of trouble. The thought, well, I could do that.
You don't like these tennis shoes?
No, they're fine.
At a certain point, I realized starting this company, this is a story a business reporter like me would have killed for, with behind-the-scenes access to all these embarrassing details that never get reported. Like, for example, when you're about to make your first ever pitch to an investor, how do you dress? Business formal? Tech casual? My wife took issue with my shoes.
They're fine. There'd be a higher chance that he's going to give you money if you're not wearing running shoes. Don't you think that's true?
These are the only shoes that I can wear that my feet don't hurt.
So yes, you are listening to the first episode of a podcast mini-series I'm making about the starting of my podcast company. Meta, I know. I've been recording pitches to investors, difficult negotiations with my co-founder, tense conversations with my wife. I'm calling this miniseries Startup. It'll be 6 to 8 episodes or so, airing roughly every other week. And I'm in the middle of things right now. I have no idea how this all ends. What I do know, we have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. My wife has a demanding job where she works till 11 o'clock most nights a week. I'm leaving a full-time job with a good salary and benefits for an uncertain future. Our plan, if you can call it that, is to spend down our meager savings, go into debt, and hope it works out. I have a lot of anxiety. Nazanin has a lot of anxiety, which is all focused at this moment on which shoes I should wear.
I don't know. You think these look better? I'm not sure they look better. I think these look like nursing shoes.
Why did you buy them?
To play tennis in.
Oh, they're like actual tennis shoes. Oh, okay. Then, yeah, wear the other.
Often hailed as one of the greatest podcasts of all time, Reply All was a groundbreaking exploration of internet culture hosted by PJ Volt and Alex Goldman. It wasn't just about the quirky internet mysteries, it was about human stories in the digital world. Episodes like The Case of the Missing Hit became instant classics, blending humor, investigative journalism, and deep storytelling. But the show's legacy was complicated by a major scandal in 2021 when the co-hosts were accused of fostering a toxic work environment during Gimlet's unionizing efforts. The accusation of hypocrisy, especially in the midst of Reply All's own reporting on a racially inequity at Bon Appetit, deeply tarnished its reputation, leading to Volt's resignation and the eventual cancellation of the show. Science Versus, which still runs today, is a science journalism podcast. It was the rare survivor of Spotify's aggressive restructuring. Its mission was clear: to debunk pseudoscience and present evidence-based facts on hot-button topics. Science Versus tackled everything from climate change to fad diets, offering listeners a clear-eyed, research-driven perspective in an era of misinformation. Heavyweights was hosted by Jonathan Goldstein. Heavyweights was a tender, often bittersweet podcast that revisits someone's unresolved past. From confronting childhood bullies to making amends with estranged family members, the show dedicated and explored the emotional terrain of regret and redemption. It was canceled in 2023 as part of Spotify's restructuring, leaving fans to mourn the loss of one of podcast's most introspective voices. A collaboration with the Wall Street Journal, the Journal offered a sharp, timely analysis of current business and economic events. Unlike the more personal storytelling of other Gimlet shows, the Journal catered to those craving up-to-date news presented with clarity and depth. Crimetown was a podcast that delved into the criminal underworld of American cities, with its first season focusing on Providence, Rhode Island. Rich with archival footage and first-hand accounts, Crimetown brought the complexities of organized crimes to life, exploring the ways it shaped local culture and politics. The mystery show, which ran for only one season in 2015, was a beloved brainchild of Starlee Klein. The mystery show is quirky, intimate, and utterly delightful. It is also one of my all-time favorite podcasts. Klein solved everyday mysteries submitted by listeners. Mysteries like, how tall is Jake Gyllenhaal? With a unique combination of curiosity and warmth. Despite its cult following, the show was abruptly canceled after one season, sparking speculation about the behind-the-scenes conflicts. Klein later revealed that she had been fired, though the exact reasons for the show's premature demise remain unclear. How to Save the Planet ran from 2020 to 2022. It was a hopeful podcast about climate change solutions. The show combined rigorous science with an urgent call to action, offering practical ways to fight climate change. It was canceled in 2022 during Spotify's cost-cutting measures, and a move that disappointed many who saw it as one of Gimlet's most important shows. The nod celebrated the richness of black culture through stories that were joyful, thought-provoking, and sometimes heartbreaking. It stood out among Gimlet's lineup for its cultural relevance and the deep connection it forged with listeners. The show ended in 2020. A deep dive into the history of hip-hop, Mogul chronicled the untold stories of the genre's biggest players, starting with a season on hip-hop exec Chris Lightley. It brought the drama and the innovation of hip-hop's rise to life, connecting the beats and bars to the real human stories behind them. Gimlet's influence also was so profound that it even inspired a TV sitcom. In 2018, Alex Inc., a comedy based on Bloomberg's experience launching Gimlet, aired on ABC, starring Zach Braff as Alex Schulman, a fictionalized version of Bloomberg. The show chronicled the ups and downs of a family man who quit his stable job to start a podcast company. While the show was a lighthearted take on the world of entrepreneurship, it struggled to capture both the depth and authenticity that made Startup, the podcast is based on, so compelling. Though Zach brought his usual charm, Alex Inc. couldn't quite translate the magic of podcasting to television. The show was canceled after just one season, a fate that illustrated the difficult art of adapting the intimate, often personal nature of podcasts into a more traditional, broad appeal TV format. The purchase of Gimlet by Spotify in 2019 was heralded as a landmark moment for the podcast industry, a sign that podcasts were now a serious business. For Gimlet, it meant an influx of resources, access to a massive platform, and a shot at scaling in a way they had never imagined. But with the promise of financial security came the burden of corporate oversight. Spotify had a different version of podcasts. Where Gimlet wanted to focus on quality, narrative, and storytelling, Spotify wanted scale, efficiency, and profits. The tension between the two visions quickly became apparent. Creative burnout among employees set in as the demands to produce more content faster began to override the care and attention Gimlet had once poured into his shows. Internal dissatisfaction grew, leading to unionizing efforts in 2019, with the staff demanding better working conditions, more diversity, and greater creative autonomy. The controversy surrounding Reply All also worsened these internal factions. The accusations of toxic leadership, particularly around issues of race and labor during Gimlet's unionization, led to a public reckoning for the company. The very people who had built their reputation on progressive storytelling were now under scrutiny for failing to live up to those ideas behind the scenes. The people at Gimlet were told that Spotify loved what they were doing and that nothing would change. Management kept saying that this was going to be amazing for everyone. But the day the deal closed was dramatic. After they announced the news, the whole company got on a bus and went to a private concert where they had cocktails with some of Spotify's executives at their office in Chelsea. Then Gimlet started to get requests from the higher ups. And it would be like, we want to increase numbers of Spotify listeners on your show. So you need to make bonus content, okay? It had a huge impact on their production. It was obvious that Spotify didn't understand how making podcasts work or what the relationship with the audience at Gimlet was like at all. The requests from Spotify escalated, and eventually they were pretty much all the shows would go exclusive, which Gimlet management had promised would never happen, meaning that all the shows under the Gimlet banner were only exclusive to Spotify, and they wouldn't be pushed out to other podcast platforms like Apple or Stitcher. So instead of growing audiences on Spotify, the Gimlet staff was supposed to extract the value out of the audience for Spotify. There was no budget for promoting shows aside from promotion within the Spotify platform. Spotify was not going to pour money into promoting Gimlet shows anywhere else. Meanwhile, every week Spotify was heavily promoting shows that had that were big names, headline-grabbing shows, or their deals with celebrities. Interesting, most of those personality-driven shows didn't do very well, like the Obama Springsteen podcast. It did terribly, and it was a total dud. Before Spotify acquired Gimlet, Gimlet had an amazing sales team and had one of the highest CPMs in the industry. Inventory was always sold out. It made money consistently. It was profitable. It was clear Gimlet was now in the hands of a company that did not understand what they did and did not care about anything they were making. After the sale, Bloomberg returned to startup for a 3-part finale about what it's really like to sell a business. Now that Spotify had begun smelting down Gimlet for its elements, those startup episodes make for strange listening. In the finale, Bloomberg does worry about whether Spotify's overtures of offhand management were simply part of the courtship ritual. But in Startup's closing scene, a big party at Spotify's office, he tells his employees that this was the best exit possible. Spotify acquired Gimlet because it saw something special in the studio, but instead of building on the legacy, the company undermined it, and 4 years later, Gimlet is no more. By 2023, Spotify's restructuring efforts hit hard. Hundreds of employees were laid off, and Gimlet was merged with Parcast. Gimlet, as an independent podcast studio, was no more. Its once defining mission to tell authentic, narrative-rich stories was sidelined in favor of a more commercially viable, ad-friendly content. Bloomberg and Lieber became millionaires in the move, as did other senior staffers at Gimlet who acquired equity over the years with the company. This was not the case for the workers who had worked at the company for several years, but in a contract capacity. They were just screwed. Gimlet's story is a cautionary tale about what happens when creativity collides with the corporate ambition. Alex Bloomberg's dream of building a company that could tell deep, meaningful stories was realized only to be compromised by the pressure of scaling up, meeting investors' expectations, and staying profitable. While Gimlet's innovative spirits will be remembered for setting a new standard in podcasting, its downfall is a sobering reminder of how quickly creative freedom can be sacrificed in the name of financial growth. The podcast world that Gimlet helps shape is now far different from the one it entered in 2014. It's bigger, it's louder, it's more focused on quantity over quality. As for Alex Bloomberg, after leaving Spotify in 2022, he's turned his focus to Daisy Chain Energy, a company dedicated to decarbonizing residential and commercial building. In the end, the legacy of Gimlet Media lives on in the stories it told, the industry it shaped, and the creative potential it unlocked. But it also serves as a bittersweet lesson in the fragility of the creative independence in face of the corporate consolidation. In a world where everything is for sale, even the most revolutionary ideas can lose their way.